Hey guys, it's Jake. Welcome back to the channel. Today we've got the latest episode of our racing vlog series for you. Now, I was late to the party on this one. I didn't have time to do my usual to-camera intro to give you the lowdown of the race, the route and the riders. So we're just going to jump straight into this one from the pen as I walk you through it. And tonight we're tackling Rising Empire in New York. So we're going to do that lovely New York comp, not once, but twice in just 20k of racing. And as we start this one, we can see there's only roughly 10 riders in B category, so it's quite a small field, but don't let that fool you. I've made the mistake before of thinking small field equals easy race, and especially in New York with those ramps, those rises and those climbs, it's just not true. You're going to have to be really careful about letting the gaps open up because there's much less draft to protect you. In a bigger group, you can afford to take your foot off the pedal, do a little bit less power, and cling onto the rider's wheels around you. However, in a field of only 10, it's just not possible. If a gap of over 5 meters opens up, it's going to be really difficult to close. So we're going to keep that in mind. We've got our teammate Patrick with us. We're two of the strongest riders in this race for sure, and we're going to try and be there at the end. No doubt we'll have to play some mind games with the other riders. There's plenty of climbs. I'm not going to do any work where I don't have to, and we're going to try and cause some carnage on those climbs. And as we can see here, the real climbing hasn't even started. We've only done one of the smaller ramps, but already we've got a few riders binned off from the back of the group. We're down to about 7 riders who have made it over this ramp and are going to make it to the bottom of the KOM. And right here at the base of where the proper climbing starts is where we start to get people really jumping the shark and going way too hard, way too early. So there's a few attacks on the front here. This is only a small rise and there's some riders doing 6-7 watts per kilo on the front, trying to get a bit of a gap, make life harder for the weaker riders. And just as I get onto the back of their wheels, think that everything's starting to slow down, I'm going to pace myself for this climb. Even more attacks start to happen as a rider who was a couple of seconds off the back bridges back on and then attacks at 8 watts per kilo to try and get a gap on the front of the group. Now this is a bold attack, but I have to say I think it was misguided. I think you could have used that energy elsewhere for better use. So we're just going to sit in. I'm keeping an eye on Benson. I'm not going to let him get too far of a gap. His power at the minute at 4.6 watts per kilo probably isn't enough to get away from me and the rest of the group unless he holds that basically until the end of the race. So me and Patrick are letting the other riders around us, Lewis and Crayenbrink, do some of the work. We're not going to do all of it to try and bridge up to Benson, even though we've got the numbers. Even though some of the other riders are going to be leaning on us as the team with the numbers to do the work, we're not going to be taken for fools and we're not going to do the work, drag everybody to the finish. So the gap's starting to come down to Benson now as some of the stronger riders like Lewis crack on. So like I said before, we're just going to follow those wheels and not let any gaps open up and see what happens. So as predicted, it all comes back together. Before long, one of the weaker riders got binned off the back of the group, so I suppose it did accomplish something. And as we hit the base of the comp proper, everything starts to explode. There's an A rider just off the front who starts to attack, and we use that as a catalyst to start putting down a little bit of power and see where everybody is at. As we start to get further up this climb, we're not going particularly hard, we're just applying a little bit of pressure. We close in on the A rider, so we know we must be doing a fairly decent pace. There's still 6 of us in the group, everybody's here, so we're just going to start testing people. And ideally we'll try and hold a fairly comfortable pace here, and then my plan is to go really hard on the steep kicker at the top and try and bin off a couple of riders who are in difficulty. So Lewis goes hard here, I close the gap straight onto his wheel, and I'm adamant that we're not getting gapped here or left behind by anybody. But as we can see, some of the other riders are starting to hit problems. Benson, who did that big attack earlier, is probably regretting using some of that energy as he dangles just off the back of the group, and that gap gets bigger and bigger. And you can really see the power of the draft there as it levels out pretty much here. But because he's not in the draft and he's off the back, it's game over for Benson. As we hit the steeper, sharper part of this climb, so I'm going to go as hard as I can and try and bin off 1 or 2 of the other riders. And I'm keeping an eye on the power of the riders around me as well as the gaps, and I can feel the strain is starting to hit the group. The gaps are starting to open up. The stronger riders are just behind me, but there looks like there's some gaps. It looks like Crayenbrink has finally cracked there. This little dig has put him into difficulty just off the back, and he's in big trouble. The other riders aren't too far behind and are probably going to be okay here as I hit the banner. I've only got a gap of about 15 meters, so it's not really worth me pushing on, trying to get away solo. So I'm going to ease up a little bit as we go through the banner here, let the couple of riders behind me group up as we've made it to a reduced front group. So that's the first calm out of the way, and we are halfway through the race. We've got one more calm to come. Now you could be forgiven here for thinking this is a descent, this is where you recover, and we're going to be fine. But there's a valuable lesson I want you to pay close attention to here. Keep a close eye on the French rider menu and look at what happens as he goes into the super tuck to the front of the group, but he's not paying attention, and that super tuck costs him dearly as he slides to the back of the group. There's a 10-meter gap, and from then on it's over, game over. Menu's race is done. He's not coming back to the front group. It looks tantalizingly close, that 10-meter gap, but when you're doing 66 to 70 kph, if you let a gap open up of a group of 3 riders and you're not a heavy rider, you are in serious trouble. So a really valuable lesson there on descents and racing on descents. I'm pretty sure I've been dropped on more descents racing than climbs, especially if you're a weaker rider. You've got to be so careful about the draft there. So Menu's race is over, and now we're down to 3. And this is where the tactics play a really crucial role, especially between 3 fairly evenly matched riders. Now, tactically, me and Patrick have probably got the best punch and the best sprint here. So, as always, if you're a sprinter, your best plan is to sit in, not do any work, and then try and hit them as hard as you can with one big attack. Even though we've got 2 riders here, I don't really see much point in working to stay away from the riders behind, because I'm pretty sure they're cooked, which is why they got binned off on the climbs in the first place. And the rider in the weakest position here is obviously Lewis, because he's on his own, which makes the tactics that he takes even stranger to try and rationalize. If I was him, I would be doing absolutely zero work here and forcing me and Patrick to pull through and take pace of the group. But instead, we just decide to sit on him and let him work. If he's going to keep pulling over 4 watts per kilo to get us to the base of that climb, he's doing us a massive favour, keeping us away from the riders behind. And as we start up on the climbing again, Lewis is still holding that sort of pace, which makes me think that he's just sort of got that level left in the tank. And maybe there's a little bit of rope-a-dope here from us, and he thinks we're weaker than we are, so he's trying to push on, keep the pace high, not let us recover. I could understand that if that's his tactic, but I think potentially he misjudged it, seeing as how hard we went on the previous climb, showing that we had plenty left in the tank. So as we hit the KOM banner here and we start going up it again, me and Patrick have basically been recovering since the descent from the last climb, whilst Lewis has been pulling us to the base of this one. So he's probably way more cooked than we are at this point. And as I always like to do, when we get to the climb, we've saved that energy, we're going to go really hard and try and bin Lewis off the back. And this is a great climb for trying to cause separation, because there are some really steep ramps where that draft effect is negated. If you're below 17 or 18 kph, there's no draft effect. So any speeds lower than that, you're not getting any draft from anybody. It's purely psychological, and you're acting as a pacer for them. So we can see here we're at 20 kph. There's a tiny bit of draft. So I'm just sat at the back, making Lewis hold that middle wheel. And when it ramps up, we're going to really turn on the pace and try and see where he's at. So we do just that as it ramps up really steeply here, and we start to put in a bit of a burst, as does Patrick. Just over the top of this is where it flattens out, so you have to really be putting on the power as it goes over the top and as it flattens out. And as we can see there, Lewis eases off the power a little bit as it flattens out, and that is the gap starting to open. It looks like it's 5 or 10 meters. His pace eased off a little bit there on the flat, and it's cost him badly. He's out of the draft. It's now 20 meters, and that gap is just getting bigger and bigger as we start the KOM proper itself. And Lewis's race is almost over here. He's going to have to put in a huge dig to try and get back in. But in all likelihood, he's already cooked from that extra work that he did between the top of the last com and the start of this one. So we've profited from that. We've gone as hard as we can. And now me and Patrick are at the front of the group, just the 2 of us with a gap. We've got a group breakaway, and we're going to try and hold it to the top of this climb, go as hard as we can, and then see what the gap looks like as we go over the top. So I'm the pacer here. When me and Patrick ride, Patrick's the sprinter, I'm the climber. We've got a GC league going on for this series that Patrick is currently leading in B. So all we need to do is get him on the podium for this race, and he's wrapped up the GC competition for B category, which means I'm going to go as hard as I can for him on this climb, keep him within 5 meters of my wheel, and try and guide him to the top. He's a super strong rider. He doesn't need me, but if I'm there and I can help him and we can wrap that competition up, then we can talk about the stage win. So we crack on here. I'm just going to go as hard as I can. My legs really start to hurt in a minute. because I'm aware that we just need to get as big a gap over the third place rider Lewis as possible, and then it's ours to lose. So really going to grind it out here. I'm at quite a low cadence, quite a high power, and we're just trying to put as much daylight as possible between us and everybody else. And luckily for me, I've got the feather power up, which is exactly what you want on these sorts of ramps. So this is the time to deploy it when it gets really steep, and then we put in a massive acceleration just to try and go as hard towards the top as we possibly can. Like I said, we're keeping an eye on Patrick, making sure he's in my wheel, but he's really not in any difficulty here. He's a super strong rider, so I don't have to pay any attention to him. I probably couldn't even drop him if I tried. And the legs are screaming at me at this point. They really hurt. The lactic acid overload is there, but I know we are super close to the end of this race and we're in a great position. So give Patrick a little bit of encouragement.
Come on, there it is.
And we know that the finish line is in sight. The KOM banner is right there. We put in one big dig. Patrick deploys his power up and we're going to make it over the top together. And as we take a look around and surveil the damage, see what the score is with the other riders, we can see that Menu in 4th place is almost 2 minutes back. He's totally out of the equation. And Lewis is 30 seconds back. And the bad news for him is he is a solo rider on this descent. So on this descent, that gap is probably only going to get bigger. So now we go over the top of the KOM with a 30-second gap and roughly 4 kilometers left on the course. We can be fairly assured of the victory between us.
There's no point one of us going on our own.
And now that all the hard work is done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to sort out. Who will take the stage win?
What do you think? If I take the stage win, 'cause it's my last one, you take the GC? Okay, deal. I'm not going to argue with you this time. We're just going to keep working a little bit longer and we're safe. We get some recovery here.
So Patrick already has 3 stage wins in New York for this series and the GC wrapped up, so he's graciously let me take this one as the final stage of this series, as a thank you for helping domestique him through this series so far. Patrick keeps pulling for me here. We're working together, trying to hold 5 or just above 5 on the front until the very end. Even though that gap is over 30 seconds, you really don't want to give the other rider a chance, a hope in hell that they're going to be able to get back on. You don't want them to have any positivity about it. You want them to basically just throw in the towel and give up. So we try and keep the pace really high and break Lewis's spirit. But credit to him, he keeps pushing, he keeps going, and he never gives up. However, unfortunately for him, that gap just gets bigger and bigger. When you've got 2 against 1, it's just really difficult to close the gaps. And as we're approaching the final 500 meters here, it's game over for Lewis. We've got the win wrapped up, and now it's just about taking it home and thinking, what is the worst possible celebration that I can pull out of the bag to make myself look like an idiot on YouTube once again? And there you have it. That celebration was in fact pretty bad, so you can't really argue with me there. And as we have a look at the Zwift Power results and power after the fact, we can see that the average race power was only 3.9, which is quite high for a B race, but that's due to the nature of the field. However, if we look at the normalized power, we can see that significantly higher, over 20 watts higher, which is much more like 4.2, 4.3 watts per kilo, and shows the truer indication of how hard that race was. Those small field races are really brutal. Like I said, there's just nowhere to hide, nobody to draft, and it's man against man. So I hope you enjoyed that one. It was a little bit different to the usual ones. It's not often you get to make a deal at the end of a race to see who takes the win. And as always, please make sure to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. It makes a huge difference to the YouTube algorithm, especially for smaller channels like mine, and means that these videos can reach more people. So thanks as always for watching, and catch you on the next one.